From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. Deb Mell, or precisely Mell, will no longer be alderman in Albany Park in the 33rd Ward environs, ending a 40-year run, and that's big enough news in itself, but her replacement, Rosanna Rodriguez-Sanchez, will become the 6th Democratic Socialist alderman when our new city council convenes in a few weeks. And the already existing Progressive Caucus is set to have, depending on how you count heads, about a dozen or so members, maybe more. So if these two groups work together on legislation, and I can't believe I'm using the terms legislation and the Chicago City Council in the same sentence, but if they do, they'd be starting with a base of maybe 18, 19 votes toward the 26 that they would need to pass an ordinance. Think of that. And add to that the obvious fact that we've got a new mayor, and she's generally perceived to be at least somewhat to the left of Rahm Emanuel on many issues. So you have the prospect of a left-leaning government structure in Chicago. Who knows how that's going to impact police, education, public health, a whole basket of related issues over the next few years. Who knows? Well, I think Carlos Ramirez-Rosa might have a few ideas. He's the one Democratic Socialist who was already in the council, having been elected from the Logan Square's the 35th Ward about 4 years ago. The pride and joy of Whitney Young High School, I understand. It's a great pleasure to welcome Alderman Ramirez-Rosa to Chicago Newsroom for the first time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming here. We have so much to catch up on. I want to start with the community meeting that you held. We've talked about it a couple of times since here on the show, up in your ward, to talk about the Emmett Street Project, which, I mean, you can describe it, but in essence, it's an all affordable housing transit-oriented development, an all affordable housing TOD. How did you pull that one off?
Well, you know, in the fall of 2014, my predecessor, Alderman Ray Colon, and the Metropolitan Planning Council carried out a community planning, participatory planning process. Mm-hmm. And they had 3 charrettes over the course of 2 months, where about 300 plus people came out, sat at tables just like we're sitting, and talked about in small groups what they would like to see an underutilized parking lot known as the Emmett Street parking lot at the corner of Emmett and Kedzie. Redeveloped
just for the sake of that it's like literally next to
Logan
like, Square.
It's like 100, 150 feet.
And it's right there.
Yeah. So right where the bus turnaround is at the Logan Square Blue Line stop. And the number one concern that the community wanted the redevelopment of that site to meet was the need for affordable housing in Logan Square. In the last 10 plus years, we've seen 10,000 plus mainly Latino working class families pushed out of Logan Square by rising rents, by big landlords, by big developers. And so there's a real big need in the entire city of Chicago for affordable housing. And we also know that the city for some years now has pushed policies to create what we call transit-oriented developments. Large buildings right on the train to ensure that less people are driving and to ensure that more people are using our wonderful public transportation system in the city of Chicago.
It's so interesting to see how what starts out as a really great idea can very quickly get corrupted. I mean, I think the idea of transit-oriented development is just on the face of it a terrific idea. It can spur development in neighborhoods that haven't had much development. It relieves the amount of traffic that's on the roads because it encourages people to use the rails. But then when the big developers get hold of it, and you see what happened on Milwaukee Avenue in your neighborhood, where it's just one gigantic development after another, and it just gets all out of balance very quickly. So that's why I was just thrilled to see somebody talking about building a large building that is not chasing every dollar, every penny it can out of rents.
That's right. And so, with the remap that occurred after the last census, Logan Square was actually divided between 6 different wards. Yeah. Previously, the majority of the ward was in what was the legacy 35th Ward. Yeah. So those large developments have not moved forward in my community in the portion of Logan Square that I represent. So this is actually going to be the first TOD that we're going to be doing in my portion of Logan Square that I represent as 35th Ward Alderman.
No, you started this process. I mean, you're in your 4th year now. You got reelected, of course. You're about to start your 2nd term. But you started on this pretty much early in your administration, right?
Yeah.
So it took this long to get it to the point that you're able to I think, more or less announced that it's more or less going to happen, right?
Yeah, you know, I think for a very long time, it seemed like we were lacking the support of the fifth floor.
Okay.
You know, my office reached out to the Department of Planning and Development very early on in my tenure because based off of the Metropolitan Planning Council's process, there was a plan to issue a request for proposals to sell the land for, you know, the top dollar that the city could fetch, and then allow a developer to build a transit-oriented development at that site that would include maybe 30% affordability, with the rest, you know, market rate housing, condominiums, you know, and a large retail complex. You know, on the first and second floors of the building was kind of the concept that was being tossed around.
So, in other words, pretty much like what they did with the mega mall just a little further up the street.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I reached out to Department of Planning and Development, met with the folks that were working on this matter, and I said, hey, you know, what about 100% affordability? And they said, Alderman, why would you want to do that? And I kid you not, someone put their hands in their head.
What if we got it? So this is what happens when you elect a socialist. Oh my God.
And so, and they said, Alderman, and I'm not going to name names, but someone said, Alderman, the city needs revenue. We need to sell that piece of land for the top dollar that we can fetch. And then we need to make sure that it's on the property tax rolls, that it's bringing in sales tax revenue. And I said, look, that's a legitimate public policy concern. But another legitimate public policy concern is that we need affordable housing, particularly neighborhoods that are facing displacement like Logan Square. And here we have a city-owned land that we can give to a nonprofit affordable housing developer or to CHA to develop 100% affordable housing. And they said, well, how are you going to
sell it for maximum profit or give it away? Let's see, which one do we favor, right? Yeah.
And look, like I said, that is a legitimate public policy concern. And some of the folks that have, you know, raised their opposition to this 100% affordable housing development moving forward in the 35th Ward have said we should be selling this for top dollar. Yeah. But it seems, you know, that the community overwhelmingly has come out and said that they support. You were at the meeting, and there were over 500 people in attendance. At the end of the meeting, we collect comment cards, and 502 comment cards were submitted. 350 of them were in support of the project. 35 of them were in support of the project with conditions, so they wanted to see some changes. And we're done, you know, tallying the comment cards, and I look at the numbers and I said, no one's going to believe that. And you know, one of the leaders from a group that formed in the neighborhood to oppose this project, he was invited to, you know, witness the, you know, tallying of the comment cards, and he says it happens.
Well, it's interesting because in addition to building a fully affordable building, you're also tackling one of the, what I think is really just about the most difficult topic in affordable housing, which is large units, 3 bedrooms and so forth, right? I mean, some of the families who are being displaced, these families are being displaced by singles and couples and very low density population numbers, but the people who are being displaced have 3 kids, 4 kids, and large families, and they need large spaces. So to get something that's affordable and has enough rooms in it, that's just almost unheard of.
Yeah. So the you know, the nonprofit affordable housing developer is Bickerdike, which has a strong record of, you know, building, developing, and managing dignified affordable housing in and around the northwest side of Chicago. Most of their holdings are in Humboldt Park. So they've worked with Land & Baker Architects, who are an award-winning architectural firm that has developed a specialty in, you know, building affordable housing that is unlike, you know, the buildings that we're accustomed to in the past. So this is going to be a 100-unit building, and it's going to be a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, and we really worked with you know, Bickerdike to ensure that we maximize the number of 3 bedrooms on site. And one of the things that I love about this you know, proposed development is that Emmett Street is a residential side street, so Kedsy's a main street, and the building, because they're going to actually reroute. The city of Chicago is planning to reroute Kedzie Avenue through what is currently the Logan Square bus turnaround. So this building is actually going to be right on Kedzie after, you know,
on the new Kedzie.
On the new Kedzie, that's right. And so, you know, it's going to have storefronts on Kedzie. So it is a mixed use development. There's 4,600 square feet of retail on Kedzie. But then as you go down Emmett, the building gets smaller and smaller and smaller till it reaches two stories. along Emmett, there are duplex, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment dwellings, but they're townhouse-style apartment dwellings. Yeah. So you're going to have families, that are going to have those 3-bedroom units, and they're going to have a front yard that leads right out onto Emmett Street. And I think that that's such an innovative way, right? The building is really responding to its surroundings. Yeah. And so we're accomplishing 100 units, but we're accomplishing in a way that hasn't been done in the past, which is, ultimately it is one large building, yeah. But the 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom units are facing Emmett Street, and they're a townhouse style unit.
And so getting technical, what I learned at the meeting is that $940 is considered affordable for a family of $37,600, something like that. So in order to be able to get into this building, you're going to have to demonstrate that your income level is thus and such, right?
That's right, yeah. So the building's going to be affordable to people that are within 60% of the area median income. Okay, now 60%. When they calculate the area median income, it's actually regional. So we're talking about the entire Chicagoland area. And of course that changes over time. But yes, so for a family to be able to get into one of these units, they do need to have a minimum amount of income. They want to be able to make sure that you can afford that $940. But there's also the maximum, which is that 60% of the area median income.
And the 940 is around 30% of your income?
Precisely. So that's the goal. The goal is that, you're not paying more than, 1/3, or you're paying roughly about 1/3 of your pay.
And what's your sense of how many people in your ward are in need of that kind of housing? I mean, do you have any sense of it? Is it hundreds, thousands?
What we do know is citywide there's a desperate need for affordable housing. Yeah. About 1 in 2 Chicagoans, I believe was the last number I saw. Don't quote me on that. Yeah. No, but I think close to one out of 2 Chicagoans are rent stressed, which means that they are paying more than 30%. Many Chicagoans are paying 50, 60% of their pay.
We had the Chicago Rehab Network on here just a couple of months ago, and that's what they were talking about, is that we've now reached a point where half of Chicagoans fall below that 30% threshold. They're paying more than 30% for their housing. And so that means even if you have a job and maybe a 2-income family and everything else, it's still very difficult to stay in that 1/3 range in Chicago these days. Yeah. So let's broaden this discussion a little bit. What are we going to do in this new city council with this new mayor, with the affordable the requirements ordinance, the ARO? I mean, this has been a battering ram for a long time, and we've seen this in essence. It's essentially you can build a gargantuan building and buy your way out of having any affordable units in it by just paying into this fee, and then the units are built elsewhere at another time. I don't, it's hard to say if any of them are ever built, but that's beside the point. This is the ordinance that stands now. And it's a product of the Emanuel administration, I believe. I think it was initiated during his time. So there's a chance now to rethink that. What are you going to be telling the city council and the planning department?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm really excited about, Mayor-elect Lightfoot has committed so clearly that she wants to build more affordable housing. And I know from my friends that work in affordable housing that are serving on the transition team, it seems like they're cooking up something really good. So I look forward to hearing about exactly what Mayor-elect Lightfoot would like to see in regards of building more affordable housing. That said, I fought really hard to increase the ARO, right? So right now it says that if you get a zoning change or if you receive some public benefit or financing, you have to include at least 10% of the units as affordable, or if not, you can pay out right into you can pay the in lieu fee.
All right, bookmark right there. So this does not affect everybody who builds a development in Chicago.
Precisely.
If you have the money and the resources or whatever that you can just build it out of your own pocket, then you're not affected.
Or if you're building as of right.
As of right.
So for example, there was a bakery with a parking lot, large lot, developer purchased it, then he sat on it for many years. And then he did not need a zoning change. And because he did not need a zoning change, he applied for the building permits. And he is now gonna build 60 units, mostly studios, and the community has no say. And this is in Logan Square, in my neighborhood, in the ward that I represent.
Whereabouts? Can you say?
So it's right at Spalding and Milwaukee. So the
oh.
other entrance to the Logan Square Blue Line stop.
Yeah, okay.
And
Wow.
you know, I heard from residents who said, why does this not include any affordability? We don't like the design. And I said, you know, he's building as of right.
As of right.
He has the money. He's not asking the city for zoning change for anything. But I did sit down with him, and he has, you know, decided to include some units of affordability. He's committed to 3. That's 5%, right? And we know that those 3 units, while I'm happy that he's going to include 3 units out of the 60, you know, we know that it's not meeting the needs of our community when it comes to, you know, providing for affordable housing. So, you know, there's been a push to expand the ARO. You know, some communities are calling for 20%. You know, there's been talk of people calling for 30%. But at the end of the day, the ARO is predicated upon things getting built that need a zoning change. And so if they don't need a zoning change, if they're not using TIF money, then the ARO is not triggered. And so the question then is, how do we build the affordable housing that we need? And so I feel that, you know, the market is not going to provide us with the number of affordable units that we need. And we know that we need to build tens of thousands aggressively.
We've got years of experience to back you up on that.
Yeah. And there's also a recent study that found, you know, because one of the arguments that, you know, a lot of, you know, density or TOD advocates were making was that, you know, this was the solution, that if we built more units, that we would then be able to have the market, you know, respond, and we would see maybe a decrease in rents. But a recent study was actually done by the MPC that found that in reality it leads to a luxury market. And that's actually, you know, similar to a study that was done around transit-oriented development and just building these super dense buildings around trains in Rome. And I believe that was done back in 2006. Because when I became alderman, you know, people said, Alderman, the solution to affordability is build, build, build. Let the developers build these large luxury buildings, and eventually you'll see, you know, rents drop. And I said, well, I want to see some research around that. So I looked up, the only study that I could find was looking at Rome and TOD in Rome from 2006, and it said that it led to a luxury market. And now in Chicago, we have a similar study that shows it just leads to a luxury market.
Well, think about Manhattan. Manhattan is, the entire island is a TOD, right? I mean, it's all within a couple of blocks of rapid transit. And that's like the world's largest luxury market at this point, Manhattan.
That's right.
I mean, it's just, well, I mean, we use it as a phrase, you know, the Manhattanization of Logan Square or whatever. So, yeah, it's another one of those good intentions gone wrong. It seemed like it was. We always talk about density, and density is important, right? When a city begins to lose density, it begins to lose its soul, because that's what a city is. And you know, we had Rob Perral, the demographer, on here. I think last week he was on and talking about Chicago is a machine that processes immigrants and immigration. That's what it does. That's what it's always done. And the way it does it is by having these kind of densely packed neighborhoods with tight streets and small lots, and you know, it becomes a place that's very attractive for first-generation immigrants and families. And you can see the history of Chicago as they move up and move out, or whatever. But that's one of the functions of Chicago. And what we're doing now is we're cutting that off in midstream. We're just stopping that process. And it's really a fascinating thing to see. And I mean, you know, your neighborhood is a laboratory for this. So,
yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that a lot of families that are displaced from Logan Square, they're moving to Cicero, they're moving to Berwyn, they're moving further west. And oftentimes that means that they're further away from public transportation, which means it's much more difficult for them to get access to good quality jobs. And so the people that most need to be closest to the train are increasingly finding it difficult to be close to the train. They're also ending up in neighborhoods with a lot less green space. And so these are the things that our families need to be able to grow and thrive in this country. And so, you know, when looking at TOD as the solution with the ARO, right? Because that was the solution that was presented to me by many people. They said, Alderman, we share your values. We want to see affordable housing getting built. So that means let's do transit-oriented development coupled with the ARO, require the developer to build the units on site. So you're going to get 10%. Maybe you can ask them to go up above 10% and do 20. If they agree to 20, you're going to get 20% of the units as affordable. But what we've seen is that the vast majority of units that are getting built under the ARO are studios.
Yeah.
And I've actually heard stories of, the ARO units that were built in Logan Square that developers actually went up and down to the bars in Logan Square and asked the bartenders, asked the servers, to apply to live in these units.
Oh, okay.
Because their income met the requirements. And that's great. That's wonderful. I'm happy for every single individual that was able to get one of those affordable units. But it's not providing the housing that we need for families that are being displaced. And so that is, part of the rationale behind doing a 100% affordable TOD with 100 units. Some people said it's too dense, right? I heard folks comparing this to Cabrini Green. I go, do you know how many thousands of units Cabrini Green was?
Do you know how dense, this development just three, a mile up the road is?
Right.
So how do you deal with, I gotta say that one of the reasons that I went to your thing the other night was I thought, this is gonna be a piece of political theater because there are going to be hundreds of people there who are just diametrically opposed to this. You're moving more and more of these wealthy people into the neighborhood, and the last thing they want is something like this. And I was kind of stunned to see how lopsided it was, and that it wasn't just all people who you think are, in the displaced community. There were a lot of other folks there who looked, again, we're dealing with prejudices here, but look more like me, people who look like they're a little older and they're probably comfortable in their lives. And they're supporting it too. So somehow or other, your neighborhood is working in that sense that even the people who are gentrifying appear to be sympathetic to your cause. Am I wrong about that?
I think Logan Square is a very progressive community. It's a community with a lot of values that when I was first running, I got elected by knocking a ton of doors. And one of the things that people consistently told me was that they loved the diversity of Logan Square, that they wanted to see a community that remained both, socially, economically, and racially diverse. And so I think folks understand, given how far Logan Square has gone with, the number of families displaced, that the only way we're going to be able to counter that is with these types of developments. So I think that we saw Logan Square's values on display, but I think what we also need to talk about is organizing. And it's important to have an organized community.
It's not just organically like that.
And so the community started organizing in 2014. So the Logan Square Neighborhood Association, Affordable Housing Advocates, when the MPC process initiated in 2014, that's when the community started coming out and saying, okay, the city's making moves here. They're clearly planning to do something with this underutilized parking lot. Let's get our voices and let's make sure we have a seat at the table to say affordability is what needs to be accomplished here. So that organizing occurred, and then shortly after I took office in 2015, 2016, that organizing continued. So this has been a sustained organizing effort over the last 5 years. Thousands of doors were knocked. The independent political organization in the 35th Ward, which is called United Neighbors of the 35th Ward, they launched a petition drive in 2016 where they collected 600 signatures in the vicinity of the parking lot in support of 100% affordable housing. And then fast forward, when we announced the public meeting, and we announced it April 3rd, and we announced the April 24th public meeting date, Logan Square Neighborhood Association, United Neighbors of the 35th Ward, We Are Somos Logan Square, and a variety of other community groups went out and started knocking doors. And so they actually just turned into my office 800 cards that individuals that live within a half-mile radius of the Emmett Street parking lot signed in support of this proposal.
One of the things that I've just been dying to ask you about is I live further up, adjacent to John Arena's ward, and I'm just wondering what your assessment is of what happened to John Arena. John Arena was is a very progressive guy, had a lot of ideas for how to introduce, I would say, in a very logical and intelligent way into the community, some low income and subsidized housing of one sort or another. And he seemed to be very popular, but not quite popular enough, and he got knocked out.
Yeah, I mean, I think elections, there's a lot of variables at play. And so, without having looked at the data, without having assessed what was the narrative that was developing around each candidate, I do think that there is a narrative out there that John Arena lost because he pushed forward 5150, which was an affordable housing development right off the Jefferson Blue Line stop. I think that there's most certainly some truth to that. It's funny, some opponents of this development, were accusing me online and saying, oh, the alderman is doing this to get votes. He wants to, have 100 people, living there that are then going to become his voters. The reality is that voters tend to be more affluent. And my experience has been that, with the affordable housing developments that currently exist in the 35th Ward, we're actually not seeing many voters there. And there's actually a need for an intentional, voter registration drive. I will more than likely lose votes as a result of pushing this forward. I mean, I think if we look at what occurred in the 45th Ward, but it's necessary to do what is right. And, I think that one of the lessons that we learned, and when I say we, I mean the broader progressive community, affordable housing advocates, is that you really got to organize. And so, responding to what happened in the 45th Ward around the 5150 development, we kind of looked at that and said, all right, how can we avoid some of those pitfalls? And that's why you saw such a robust organizing effort leading up to the meeting. Yeah,
and I just, to stay on this for just a moment longer, I think it's interesting because I, again, this is just nothing more than just personal observation, but my sense of it is that John Arena's sort of, Jefferson Park and Portage Park communities are not terribly different than the community you have, in the sense that there is a large base of progressive voters there. There certainly are. They've kept him in office, in the past. But that something went wrong, and the messaging didn't come across properly, or something, or he allowed his opponents to command the message and to change the message.
Yeah, I mean, there was a very loud, committed opposition to 5150. Unfortunately, from what I saw online, a lot of it was rooted in antiquated notions about what affordable housing is. People comparing this to Cabrini Green, to the Robert Taylor homes. Unfortunately, that can be perceived as coded language.
Well,
to me, we don't want certain people in this community. So, I mean, I think it's, for a very long time, people told me, Alderman, you can't have a meeting around affordable housing and expect that the community is going to come out and support it. That having, because in the 35th Ward we have a community-driven zoning process, and so working with community groups, we've put in very clear guidelines that have been in place since I took office. And so that means if a project needs a zoning change, or if it needs my support in the city council in order for it to advance, it has to go through our community input process, which brings in local community groups. They vet the development, they make recommendations on it, and then it proceeds to a community input meeting, which is the meeting that you attended and that we hosted on April 24th. And so people said there's no way that you're going to be able to have a community meeting around affordable housing and have it go well. In reality, this is actually the third community meeting we've now had in my ward around affordable housing. We did one for a scattered site development. It was 3 units on one lot. That went, overwhelmingly in support of the development. And then we also had another meeting in Albany Park, at the border of Irving Park and Albany Park by Montrose and Kimball, for another 100% affordable housing development. This one built by Evergreen, and that's 46 units. They just changed the number of units again. But that
that's
meeting.
That's not you, is it? Montrose and Kimball.
Yeah, the 35th Ward goes up to Montrose and Kimball now. Yes. Okay, yeah. So I'm very proud to represent a portion of Albany Park and Irving Park. So we had a community meeting for an upzone to allow for a 100% affordable housing development to be built there, and again, similar organizing effort. Residents that were in support of the development went out and knocked doors and talked to their neighbors and dispelled a lot of the misinformation and misconceptions that exist. Because in reality, what's being built these days in the city of Chicago, when we call it affordable housing, is workforce housing. Yes. You have to have a minimum income. Right. And yes, it's capped, but this is housing that's going to go to teacher aides. This is housing that's going to go to, security workers. That would not be able to find these affordable units in Chicago, but for us building them now, unfortunately.
To a lot of those people who got privatized out of their jobs at O'Hare, and their salary went down by 40% or whatever it is. let's expand this a little bit and talk about the council, because as I mentioned at the top, everybody's got their opinion about what's about to happen in the city council, and I honestly believe nobody really knows. But it does look like the council might have a little bit of a leftward drift. I mean, it's hard to say, but what's your sense of it?
Yeah, so we now have 6 Democratic Socialists in the Chicago City Council. And it looks like the
Sometime you're going to have to tell me what that is.
means you believe in democracy,
Oh, it's so simple as that. Oh, that's what
I think, it means you want to have, democracy in the workplace, democracy in the economy. When you see wealth, in the hands of a few people and they get to control everything, right? That is antithetical to democracy. And when you see a government where there's a few people controlling everything and it's authoritarian, right? That's antithetical to democracy. So for me as a Democratic Socialist, right, I want to see true democracy, participatory democracy, both when it relates to the economy and as it relates, to the state. But that said, so we got 6 Democratic Socialists, and then we have I think it may be between 16 to 18 members of the Progressive Caucus, depending on how it pans out. I know there's some folks.
Some of these are the same people, right?
Right. So there's 11 members of the Progressive Caucus in the existing council. Unfortunately, 2 of them were not reelected. That was John Arena and Tony Folks. And then Alderman Ricardo Munoz, this is his last term. But he was replaced in the city council by Mike Rodriguez, who will be joining the Progressive Caucus. And so there's 9 wards that currently have a member of the Progressive Caucus that will continue to have a member of the Progressive Caucus. And then it looks like, anywhere from, 7 to 9 other aldermen may be joining. So
they might dip in and out.
Not dip in and out. I think it's there's some folks that were just reelected to the city council that have expressed interest in joining the Progressive Caucus. I certainly hope that they do so. And then there's new folks like Maria Haddon in the 49th Ward, Matt Martin in the 47th Ward, Rosana Rodriguez in the 33rd Ward, and Byron Siccho Lopez in the 25th Ward, Jeanette Taylor in the 20th Ward, Daniel Espada in the 1st Ward. So there's a number of aldermen, Andre Vasquez in the 40th Ward. There's a number of newly elected aldermen that have stated their interest in joining the Progressive Caucus.
Yeah.
So it's going to be an exciting time to see that growth. And, to the extent, like you said, Mayor-elect Lori Lightfoot has a lot of stances that are to the left of Rahm Emanuel. I think that we're going to see a lot of forward movement on a lot of important issues.
Give me an example of something where you are thinking that that the council might be divided and that you all will have the gravitas, you'll have the numbers to move it a little bit. Give me an example of something.
Well, I think when people think of the city council, maybe one of the first words that comes to mind is rubber stamp.
Yeah.
Right? They're there to rubber stamp what the mayor wants.
Right.
And so theoretically, if Lori is able to, organize the council in the same way that previous mayors have. The other day, Rahm Emanuel was doing a postmortem of his administration. He said, "I've never lost a city council vote," right? And so, if Lori's able to, organize the city council with the same precision, and if she is progressive, then there will be a progressive city council. Because unfortunately, many of my colleagues do feel that, the way to approach governing in the city of Chicago is to focus on what you can affect locally, right? And then when it comes to citywide issues, just vote however the mayor tells you to vote. I can't tell you how many aldermen told me that. When I first took office in 2015, I reached out to all 50 of my colleagues and said, "Hey, why don't you get a cup of coffee with me? Why don't you get lunch with me?" I ended up meeting with 31 of them that got back to me, and so many of them said, "Your job isn't to change the world. You're not here to focus on citywide legislation." Like you said, legislation in the city council.
Let the smarter people up on the 4th and 5th floor handle those things, and they'll just tell you how to vote.
And so obviously I rejected that, and I'm proud to have been one of the most outspoken progressive voices on the city council for the past 4 years. But that dynamic is still at play there, right? And so the question then for Mayor-elect Lightfoot is, one, are you going to be able to organize the council the same way that Rahm Emanuel was? There are some things working against her.
Yes, there are.
She's a woman. She's a black woman. Unfortunately, that may work against her. She also is not coming from Washington, D.C., right? So she doesn't have, the Obama administration shine. She doesn't have the same fundraising capability as Mayor Rahm Emanuel. But nonetheless, I still think that she has the opportunity to organize the council the same way that Mayor Rahm Emanuel did.
It should be noted here, because everybody's yelling at their TVs right now. You were not a supporter of Lori Lightfoot. You supported Tony Preckwinkle.
I did, and I had a conversation with both Lori Lightfoot and Tony Preckwinkle prior to making my decision on who I would support. And Tony Preckwinkle committed to more of the progressive policy stances that I've been fighting for alongside community groups for the last 4 years. But we now have Mayor Lightfoot, and if she's going to act on all of the progressive policies that she said she would do when she was running for mayor, I'm her first vote, right? So if she's going to erase the gang database, I'm her first vote to do that. If she wants to remove the carve-outs from the Welcoming City Ordinance to make sure we're a true sanctuary, I'm her first vote to do that. If she wants to move forward an aggressive policy to build affordable housing throughout the entire city of Chicago and make sure that we're building it in the far northwest side, that we're building it all across the city of Chicago, I'm her first vote to do that. So I think now Lori has to look at who are her 26 votes, how does she accomplish that? That could mean shaking up some of the committee chairmanships, but it also could mean not shaking that up, because again, so many of the committee chairs have said very clearly, right, I will follow what the mayor says.
Well, none more clearly than Carrie Austin.
That's right,
I mean, publicly putting it, it was right there in the Sun-Times. I'll be loyal. I'll do what you want. And that's kind of weird, considering the nasty things she said about the mayor-elect in the past. So I don't know. But I mean, so what's your sense of that? Do you think she gets to keep her job?
Well, Alderman Austin is my seatmate.
I was going to say she's your next door neighbor there.
We have a lot of fun sitting next to each other during the city council meetings. A lot of great conversations. But what I will say is that I take Chairman Austin at her word, which is that she says I'll be loyal, right? And she was nothing but loyal to Rahm Emanuel for 8 years.
Yes, she was.
She was loyal to Mayor Daley. So I take her at her word. So that means if you're Mayor-elect Lightfoot, right, and if you're progressive, right, and you have a loyal budget committee chair, then you have a progressive budget committee chair in Carrie Austin. Yeah,
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, but I also think that Mayor-elect Lightfoot has said that she wants the council to be more independent. That she wants the city council to work collaboratively in deciding its committee chairs, and so again, I think that
this is all just such strange conversation to be having. It's like the city council being more independent, and at the same time taking away mayoral prerogative, which is those things in some ways work against one another. But of course, I've always believed that there is no such thing as mayoral prerogative, aldermanic prerogative. There's only mayoral prerogative, and if the mayor wants it, he'll let you have aldermanic prerogative. If he doesn't want it, screw you, you're not going to get it.
And I think an example of that is, the Emmett Street parking lot. Because, when I met with Department of Planning and Development early on in my tenure, the support wasn't there from the administration to use, that lot to be developed as 100% affordable housing. It wasn't until we got the support of the fifth floor, and I'm very thankful for that.
Because if you had stood up in the council and said, "My brothers and sisters, I would like to be able to give this parking lot away, and I'm asking my aldermanic prerogative. I'd like you to all vote with me on that." I don't think you would have got it.
That's right, and we've seen notable examples, right? When the fifth floor, whether it was Daley or Mayor Emanuel, put their thumb on a local project. And so, generally, but aldermanic prerogative, however, is a legislative practice.
Yes,
It's not a city's code.
That's right.
It's not a statute. What it says is, I'll support every zoning change and stop sign in your ward if you support every zoning change and stop sign in my ward. It's difficult to remove that via executive order.
Well,
I'm not quite sure how you would do
how
that.
will you do that?
Yeah.
And how could you even prove that it's happening?
The only thought that I could think of, so for example, let's say I want to make a zoning change in my ward. I go to the zoning administrator who works in the executive branch. Theoretically, a mayor could instruct the zoning administrator, don't prepare that alderman's ordinance. Don't send out the notices to the properties within 250 feet. And so that would make it more difficult for me to wield my prerogative on zoning matters in my ward. But nonetheless, I could still go out and prep the ordinance myself, do the mailing myself that would be required for that legislation to move forward.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't think that there's any way that you could remove aldermanic prerogative when it comes to that legislative horse trading practice that exists in cities and legislatures across the globe.
It exists wherever there are more than 3 or 4 people, sitting around a table, right? That's immediately what you do. You start horse trading. I was like, oh, this is what I need.
But I do think that there are some things that are administrative functions that aldermanic offices do right now that could be taken out of the purview of an alderman's office. So, for example, getting an awning. If you're a small business and you want to have something hanging over the sidewalk, you have to go to your alderman's office to get their signature, and then to have them introduce the ordinance in the Chicago City Council. To me, that's an administrative function that could be carried out.
Maybe they would need tax advice, and they would need to hire a tax lawyer.
And that's where what you're talking about there, the issue that then can become ripe for abuse.
Right.
So. The way that I use, that process in my office is when a business comes in and says, I want you to sign off here to get this awning, what we do is we go into the city's 311 portal and we look to see if there's any issues or complaints related to that business. So for example, maybe they're not maintaining the sidewalk clean. Or maybe there's noise complaints or public safety issues. We'll go through our email. We'll, see if there's been any, outreach from the constituency regarding that business. And if there is, then I'll reach out to that business and say, hey, look, I'm going to sign off on your awning, but I need you to dedicate a staffer every day to clean up, the bottles that are outside of your business, or, I need you to address this noise
Another
complaint.
version of horse trading, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It's human nature. It's like, you're going to do this? Okay, you're going to have to do that.
But as you did note, unfortunately there have been times when, aldermen have, used that leverage inappropriately for their own enrichment. And that's most definitely a problem. That's a serious issue.
Yeah.
And so, I think one of the ways as a progressive that I would like to see that addressed is through public financing of campaigns. Because if you remove money out of politics, right, that ensures that we can have a healthier democracy. New York City Council created a public financing program for their city council. It's a matching program. So if you agree to be part of the program, then and you get X number of donors that donate X amount, then that's matched by the city. And that has had a tremendously positive impact on their local elections. So I'd like to see something similar in the city of Chicago. So there's a lot of different ways that we can deal with the issue of aldermanic prerogative, but going back to the example of the awnings, that's something where I think that could be taken out of an aldermanic office. It's an administrative function, and it should go to
Well, that actually raises the other question of, Bill Daley said we could cut the city council to 15 aldermen because what he wanted to do was make it a legislative body only and not a sort of a management, not like 50 little mayors who manage their little communities. I thought that was a kind of a not fully comprehensive view of what happens here, because that I agree with the notion that the city council needs to be more legislative than it is now, but I also I don't know, maybe it's just quaint, but I just like the idea of 50 smaller communities and people who are responsible for those communities and who have, I think, or at least should have, their ear more to the ground and can detect issues and problems more quickly and bring them to the attention of the council or to the executive or whatever. So I'm not real clear on that. What do you think about that? Would you be willing to give your job up to make the council smaller?
I think that many Chicagoans, as you said, like having someone that has 60,000 constituents as opposed to 150 or 300,000 constituents, that they can have a more personal relationship with, that can be aware of what are the issues that are going on in their school, what are the issues that are going on that block, that can be a local steward for the entire community. My fear, if we, reduce the city council, and I do think that there could be an argument to reduce the city council. I think that 15 is entirely too small. Is that it, particularly with the way that we finance our campaigns right now, it will become extremely difficult for regular people, for insurgent candidates like myself. When I was elected in 2015. to be able to get a seat at the table, because that is going to then privilege, people that have more money and more power.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's just one of those things that kind of ties into the whole thing about how we really ideally would like to legislate. But Scott Waguespack is, I think you and others have said, he's your choice probably for the Finance Committee to replace Ed Burke. But there's also Tom Tunney in the mix too, right? Where do you stand on that?
I think that, well, and then everyone, at one point we had, Alderman Beal come forward and say that he had 31 votes to be, chair of finance. Tom Tunney has come forward and said, I have 26 votes to be chair of finance. Now Scott Waguespack says that he has, 25 votes to be.
Yeah.
Someone's bluffing, right? Because the math does not add up. My thought is that Scott Waguespack would be an excellent chair of the Finance Committee. I've said that before. I feel strongly about that. But if I had to put my money on who actually has the votes of those three, based upon the conversations I've had, I do believe that it is Alderman Tunney.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Now that said, and funny, so I have family in, Tom Tunney's ward, and they supported Tom. I supported Tom because, he was standing up to the Ricketts,
yes,
right? And
absolutely.
he was making sure that there was an alderman that was prioritizing the neighborhood.
And that got him really reelected, didn't it? I mean, that got him. That was a very interesting dynamic going on in that ward.
But that said, Tom and I have disagreed on a lot of different issues. We've disagreed on, issues relating to the minimum wage, on issues related to, fair scheduling, on workers' rights. Recently I did speak with Alderman Tunney, and he said that, he has evolved on those issues, and that he understands that, it's not 1999, and that, the workers' laws and compensation need to increase in the city of Chicago.
He is a small business guy. He owns a restaurant.
Yes, he is. So yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, I think this is where, Mayor-elect Lightfoot and, the direction that she wants the city council to go in, that I think that's when that becomes a super, a very important factor in all of this.
So I'm really keeping you over time. You give me another 5 minutes?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, all right. Let's talk police. In May of 2018, you were the only vote against the police academy going into West Garfield Park. There was, and there still is, I guess, a lot of discussion about police training and how training can and or should be done. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are now that so many other things have happened since that vote. What, do we need a physical place for training, and does that place need to be improved?
Well, there were 100 recommendations the Department of Justice made for the city of Chicago, and only one of those related to facilities.
That's right. Yeah.
What the research shows and what the recommendations from the Department of Justice reflect is that it's about curriculum. It's about what is it that's actually being taught, and most importantly, it's about accountability. Study after study after study has found that if you want to root out racist policing practices, if you want to address police violence and misconduct, what is needed is accountability. And that, ties into issues of the FOP contract, which limit, the city's ability to hold police officers accountable. It's also tied into, oversight. And Mayor-elect Lightfoot, I'm very happy to say, is in support of bringing about civilian oversight of the police. There's two proposals before the City Council, CPAC and GAPA. I compare GAPA to the Affordable Care Act. So you take the existing bureaucracy, the existing infrastructure, right, and you kind of jerry-rig a new administration, new bureaucracy on top of it.
Careful, this is the one the mayor put together, the new mayor put together, so be careful how you denigrate it.
Well, I'm not denigrating
because you introduced the other one.
So yes. So
in a way, I mean, it's grossly simplifying it, but in a way, there's sort of the Lori Lightfoot plan and the Carlos.
Well, GAPA is a community-driven plan, and CPAC is also a community-driven plan, right? It was an alliance of community groups of people that have been fighting against racist policing for a very long time. that were fighting, for justice for Laquan McDonald. That came.
And I keep cutting you off, but
Yeah.
but it also is important to point out that when your vote, which had been suppressed for years, basically, finally made it to the city council, and Lori Lightfoot's, let's not call it that, but GAPA and CPAC. When your two things came up, the mayor and his friend Ariel Rebroyes managed to put two more plans in there. So what went to the city council for consideration was actually 4 plans, even though no one had ever heard of the other 2 plans before that day, basically, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And we actually have not had a vote on GAPA or on Chairman Rebroyes' plans that he put forward. Rebroyes' plans kind of put forward a symbolic civilian oversight committee. Yeah. Which, we all know how that works out. So, I think that GAPA would be an improvement. I voted for COPA. When COPA was brought in, I voted for that. So I think that GAPA would be an improvement. Ultimately, I think that CPAC, would be the best way to approach this, because what it does is that it gets rid of the existing bureaucracy, which we know has failed us, and it brings in a new all-elected civilian oversight board that would oversee the police, discipline them, hire and fire the superintendent. So I think that that's a stronger, more clear model of accountability. So going back to the issue we were talking about, which is the police training academy, the question then is, right, if we have actually not solved the issue of police accountability, right, if we have actually not followed through on the other recommendations that the research shows are actually more important when it comes to fixing our policing system, why is it that we are selling the existing police academy, and we are then going to move it further west and spend $100 million plus on constructing it? And why is this being heralded or hailed as the thing we must do? Unfortunately, I think Chicago has a very long history of being one big real estate deal. We saw it when UIC was built, and what Daley sought to do by, tearing down tens of thousands of working people's homes. And I think we also saw it when the existing police academy, which is by Ashland and Jackson. I went to Whitney Young, so right there.
You would know.
It was built there. And part of the rationale about building it there at that point in time was, let's put a strong police force just west of the loop. And then let's allow that to help be an engine of displacement, of gentrification, right? And I think that similarly now, that's a very valuable piece of land, right? Because it's a very valuable piece of land in the West Loop.
It's kind of like Cabrini Green, right?
So Rahm Emanuel gets to sell that piece of land, right? Having played the role that, it was intended to play. And now where do they move it? Even further west, right? And where do they place it? Right next to Oak Park. So my thought is that, it's the same story we've seen time and time again in the city of Chicago, which is the city, right, is using the institutions that it has, is using the dollars that it has to help spur and bring about gentrification.
So what I think I might be hearing you say is that at some point, if you set the timeline out properly, at some point in that timeline, a time comes to talk about how the physical facilities for training, because once you have an idea of what it is you want to train, then maybe you can build a facility that accommodates that, instead of building the facility first. And
Precisely.
That makes sense.
And there was no conversation about how much would it cost to refurbish and update the existing facility. Would that be less than $100 million? None of those conversations took place, and so then I have to think about, well, then what is the motive? Why were those conversations not taking place? And it's because they wanted, and my thought is, to sell that valuable piece of land right in by what is now the West Loop, right? That used to be the West Side. Now it's the West Loop. So they want to sell that valuable piece of land just
and
west
put
of the
it in
Loop.
the West Loop.
That's right. And see if maybe some of that gentrification and development that's happening in Oak Park. I'm not going to call it gentrification because Oak Park has been affluent for a very long time. But some of that development that's happening in Oak Park maybe doesn't spill over into the adjacent neighborhood in the city of Chicago.
It is very interesting, and again, I have to say that yes, it was only one of 100 in the report, but a very important one, because so many of the conversations we have about police and police community relations ultimately come down to how are our police trained and how good a job are we doing at retaining that training, continuous training. And if your facility is, and I believe it to be true, that if your facility is inadequate for that and has been for some time, and the same thing also for the fire department, well, then it's not a bad idea to be thinking somewhere out in the future about building some kind of a comprehensive training center where all first responders go to get, because a favorite bugaboo of mine is the fact that our police department and our fire department are just completely siloed from each other. They almost never interact with each other in a way that they should. They each have their own helicopter. They each have their own boat. You know, all that kind of stuff. But I'm being glib. There would be an opportunity here to sort of cross-train in a way that hasn't been done before. So I think it's not a bad idea. But I also agree with your concept that you're putting the cart about 18 miles ahead of the horse here.
That's right. And you also then get to sell bringing the fire training facility, right, which is now in the South Loop.
Right.
So again, I think that a lot of what was driving and motivating this was a big real estate deal. We saw that with Lincoln Yards. Right?
Oh, well, I didn't even want to bring up Lincoln Yards. Yeah, selling the vehicle repair facility for a few $1 million, and then saying, well, we're going to give something to Englewood. They're going to get to fix the garbage trucks and all. Yeah, well, anyway. Oh, my God. I'm looking at the clock here. Give me 1 minute on an elected school board.
There's a bill that has advanced to the Senate. I think that it is a bill that needs to pass.
Yeah.
I know that Mayor-elect Lightfoot has issues with it. I believe that what Mayor-elect Lightfoot is asking for is, in fact, unconstitutional. So she wants a requirement that you have to be a parent to be able to serve. I think in the past, courts have found that you can't require that you have to have children in order to be elected to office. Right.
Sort of like you have to be a white landowner in order to vote. It's only a couple of steps beyond that, I suppose. Really, yeah.
So
wow, I had not thought of that.
Yeah, and so it's 21 members is the bill that's right now before the Senate. And I think similar to what we talked about with the city council, you want to make sure that it's the people, working people, average people have an opportunity to be elected. And the smaller you make the body, the more money and the more votes is necessary to be elected, and that means it's going to be much more difficult for regular folks to be able to serve.
I'd love to explore that with you more, but we're out of time. I mean, we are so out of time, we're up against the clock, and I'd invite you back, but I'm leaving, so this is our last time.
Well, I'm happy I got to make it on.
Thanks so much, Alderman Carlos Ramirez-Rosa, for being with us today.
And congrats to 10 years?
Yeah, almost 9.5.
9.5, who's counting though?
Who's counting, yeah, that's right. We are going to be back again next week, of course, but you can look at this site right here to see all of the other, 450 shows or so that we've done. Check them out if you will. And thanks to everybody here at CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis, and we will see you next week. Yes, we will, with Flint Taylor. That'll be a barn burner. See you then. Bye-bye.